Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doctor's Night Out. I'm your host, Dr. Kellyanne Petrucci, and Deep Dive is the part of Doctor's Night Out where we take an expert that we've seen on the panel with a whole lot more to say. And tonight, she sure does. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon is with us this evening. Welcome, Dr. Lyon.
Hi, Kellyanne. So pumped to be here.
Oh, I'm so pumped to have you. And, we were just talking earlier about some other interviews that she did. And what you're going to hear tonight, unless you follow Dr. Lyon, you likely have never heard what you're going to hear tonight ever before. She's talking about information that we all need, that's essential. It's essential for health. It's essential for longevity. It's essential to really help us get through what we're all going through right now, being in quarantine, worrying about COVID. All this is actually not only great for anti-aging, great for your overall health, but it's a great preventative for what's happening out there in the world. And let's just dig right in. And, the first thing I want to do is I want to go over Dr. Lyon's bio because it's really impressive. She really has some incredible creds behind her. Well, first of all, let me just say she's a dear friend of mine, and she is a force of nature out there. And I'm so thrilled to know that she's coming out with a book. She has been on it. So she has these great standards in her life. And what I love so much about Dr. Lyon is that she's very clear. She's very clear on who she is. She's very clear on where she wants to go, and her lifestyle patterns are very impressive. So when we see someone with success, when we see someone with results, when we see someone that really seems to be capturing their vision, it's because they have these lifestyle practices, and she has that. And you know what? She's also a whole lot of fun. She's a whole lot of fun. So we're going to have a great time tonight. So she is a functional medicine physician specializing in muscle-centric medicine. You may have never heard that before, but you're going to really be in awe. She leverages evidence-based medicine with emerging cutting-edge science to restore the metabolism, balance the hormones, and optimize body composition. Dr. Lyon has brought unparalleled results to her patients with personalized advanced nutritional interventions, metabolic and genetic testing, and behavioral action plans that leave no stone unturned. When you work with Dr. Lyon, you'll enter a partnership that will build long-term success and life-changing breakthroughs in every aspect of life. She can help you gain clarity and a deeper understanding of all aspects of the mind, body, and health and healing, and customize a strategic action plan. On and on and on. She attended the Arizona College of Osteopathic Medicine and is board certified in family practice. She also completed her research fellowship in nutritional science and genetics at Washington University in St. Louis. That's a really big deal. Prior to that, she was the national semi-finalist in Fitness America, a professional fitness model and nationally ranked fitness competitor. Her ongoing work is focused on metabolism, body composition, and is a nationally recognized authority. Dr. Lyon is a regular speaker, sold-out expert, all the things. She lives in New York City. I'm so glad you're here.
Me too. I'm pumped.
Okay, so she's saying she's pumped. So,
I'm pumped. And I'm fortunate that I must have sent you the wrong bio so embarrassingly of the past fitness.
Well, you know what? We all do that. I can't tell you how many things that I've done, and they read the bio and I go, wah, wah, wah. That is totally not what I wanted to say. Let me just break it down for you. She worked in a clinic. Dr. Lyon worked in a clinic in which they really took a deep dive, so to speak, into body composition, really understanding how when you eat something, exactly what your body does with that food, how it distributes in your body, and how it forms your shape. Okay, so if you've got a predisposition to something, or you are struggling with obesity, all these things that, by the way, I'm just saying, they're all the predispositional problems that are creating havoc with this virus.
Right.
These are the things that she studied. So let's start out by asking the question. So let's talk about what muscles really are. Why are they so vital? Why are they so
Absolutely.
vital?
Yes.
What is muscle-centric medicine, for God's sake?
For goodness sakes, that is the most important question.
Yeah.
So muscle-centric medicine is really this concept that muscle is the organ of longevity. Truly, it's the largest endocrine organ in the body. Just like the thyroid is an organ, muscle is an endocrine organ. And actually, when you contract it, it secretes things. And these things are called myokines, and they go through the body and they have anti-inflammatory effects. They do numerous things like BDNF, we've all heard of, for the brain. They affect the bone. They affect almost all peripheral tissues, also organs, liver, you name it. So muscle as the organ of longevity. And right now, the focus is on adiposity. And we've all heard it. How are you going to lose weight? How are you going to lose fat? And we're constantly chasing the symptom and not the root cause. So what I'm telling you right now is that defects start in the muscle first. So I want to be really clear about that. Obesity.
So everything starts, so no matter what condition that you have, it lives in the muscle before it shows up?
It starts in the muscle first. Obesity, diabetes, hypertension, Alzheimer's, all diseases of metabolic dysregulation begin in the skeletal muscle tissue first. And then they become obese, diabetic, hypertensive. So we've got the whole paradigm of thinking wrong. We're constantly focused on adiposity. That's the wrong thing.
Well, so if that's the case, then what are some of the symptoms that you have unhealthy muscle? And tell me what age are your muscles the absolute healthiest, and when are they the most unhealthy?
I don't think anyone has ever asked me that question, and I'm so glad that you did, because when you think that you're a baby, right? So when you're a baby, you have a lot of extra adiposity. You have that brown fat. If you ever take a baby out of the whatever you call it, the tub, they don't shiver, right? So their muscle to fat ratio they have a lot more fat. And then as hormones start to change, whether it's testosterone or even estrogen changes, or IGF-1 and insulin, body composition changes. And when you're young, this is really the prime time for tissue to be laid down. And you're talking really, and you can think about this in your late teens, early 20s. This is, and depending on your training status, this is the time that you're going to build the healthy muscle tissue. And listen, arguably, you can have healthy muscle tissue throughout your whole life. And we can talk about really what happens as we age, although nobody here wants to say that we're doing it. And if someone could stop it, that would be incredible.
Yeah.
But truly, as we age, that muscle tissue changes. And there's multitude of things that happen within that tissue, that organ of longevity. And this is so interesting. So what happens, number one, is this concept called anabolic resistance. And this is really interesting. And this is the inability, and we'll get more detail, deeper into this as the conversation goes on, but just on a surface level, it's an inability for the tissue to actually be able to sense nutrients, in particular protein. So that the actual quality of the tissue, the mechanisms of the tissue change.
Like insulin resistance.
Exactly. And actually, I'm so glad you brought that up, because muscle becomes increasingly more insulin resistant. And why that's so dangerous as we think about obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, these diseases of aging are diseases of insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a massive problem. Muscle is your metabolic currency. Muscle is your metabolic currency. It determines everything about your metabolism. It determines your resting metabolic rate, which is the energy that you burn at rest, right? It determines, it's the largest site for glucose disposal. So all the carbohydrates that you're eating, really your carbohydrate threshold, is largely determined by your muscle tissue and activity. And then muscle tissue is one of the largest sites of fatty acid oxidation. Cholesterol, fatty acids in the bloodstream. So what happens is, as this tissue begins to lose quality as we age, whether it's through inflammation or low levels of inflammation or inactivity or eating like we did in our 20s and carrying that over in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, because I told you that muscle isn't stimulated the same, the tissue becomes destroyed.
So does part of the destruction, I know that there's certain chemicals that are emitted out of your muscles. And that's very interesting to me because I'm wondering a lot of these inflammatory issues, we've
Yes.
learned a lot of
Yes.
words during this crisis, social distancing, flattening the curve, but we also learned the word cytokine storm. And
Yes.
every doctor that's been on Doctor's Night Out has talked about this storm. And so we've learned inflammation is a very big deal. And you say that muscles actually play a part in this storm by what they emit.
Yes, yes. And if you think about adipose tissue, so adipose tissue is like the nemesis of muscle, right? It secretes things that are very inflammatory. And even when you think about cytokines, which is what everyone's really talking about, and in particular, interleukin 6. Now, this is really interesting. So interleukin 6 is a cytokine, okay? And it comes from things like macrophages and other cells of the immune system. However, are you ready for this? Interleukin 6 is also a myokine, and it is secreted from muscle tissue. And the impact on the body, and listen, and this is early science from 2001 out of Pedersen's lab. She really pioneered this work. Interleukin 6 is a myokine from exercising muscle tissue, and it helps with nutrient partitioning. So it stimulates carbohydrate metabolism. It has all these other different roles. It's actually anti-inflammatory for the body. So it's interesting when you're an immunologist, what you focus on is what we know, right? Like if you're a carpenter, everything is a nail and a hammer. So if you're an immunologist, every interleukin 6 is bad. No, interleukin 6 in the literature, it's just an inflammatory cytokine. But I challenge people, if you look at some of that earlier work by Pedersen, and it's continued on, interleukin 6, when released from exercising muscle, which by the way, depending on your length of training and your intensity, will determine the amount of interleukin 6 that you actually release, is then systemically anti-inflammatory.
I can't wait to get to that, but I want to be really clear on something. What exactly, because I'm thinking also about the virus and how we get a hold on that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the huge problems that we face in this country, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, all these things we're talking about.
What are all diseases of metabolism, right? And that are diseases of the muscle.
Right. So explain, I want everyone to understand exactly what the relationship is between muscle and say diabetes and muscle and obesity. What is the exact pathway?
Right. So obesity, diabetes, sugar dysregulation, everything starts in the muscle first. So muscle is a major metabolic organ for nutrients, fatty acids, carbohydrates, branched chain amino acids. And on a very fundamental level, muscle determines your ability to consume calories. So how I like to think about muscle is a big suitcase. And when you're overeating, particularly carbohydrates and fats, because it's very difficult to overeat and store protein, you keep filling up your suitcase. So we can talk about protein as it relates to its thermogenic effect, and we'll get to that, I'm sure. And also how much more energy it takes to actually utilize. So it's about 15% more. Whereas say, if it takes, the energy is maybe, 3 to 5% from fat and carbohydrates, protein would be 15, right? Because you have to dispose of the nitrogen. So when you think about diabetes, obesity, hypertension, these diseases of, as they are weight related, when you look at the muscle is a suitcase. So when you're overeating, and I just had mentioned that muscle tissue, right, is the place that you dispose of these things, like carbohydrates, fats, amino acids, primarily branched chains. So when you're just eating and not exercising, the muscle becomes full. Fatty acids, branched chains, glucose goes back into the bloodstream and has to be disposed of because glucose is cytotoxic. So and then you gain weight, and then you have blood sugar regulation issues. So you don't gain weight and then it affects your muscle. Your muscle is affected by poor lifestyle choices, by inactivity, right? By not weight training.
And I want to talk about all that because what I really want to know is, do we need to eat more protein than we think? So how
Always.
much protein should we be eating?
Yeah.
And do we need to eat more as we age?
Totally.
Is there age pendulums in there?
There is.
I think that's really, people really want to know this. And I get asked this all the time.
Yeah.
How much protein am I really supposed to be eating?
And this is probably the biggest takeaway. If anyone listened to nothing else other than this is the most important piece of this conversation. Now, according to the NHANES data, which is the largest data set, the average American female eats around 70 grams, 68 grams of protein total. Okay. And I'm going to tell you why this is so important. In fact, I'm going to show you why this is so important. So the average female American eats 68 grams of protein. The average male eats around 90 grams of protein. All right. So you're thinking, maybe that's enough. So let's talk about now what happens when you age. Now, I am first going to tell you my recommendation for protein.
Okay.
My recommendation is now this is high, right? This is not in the literature. This is higher. So it's 1 gram per pound ideal body weight.
That's what I learned as well.
But the recommendation is 1 gram per pound lean muscle mass. And I don't know about you, but most people right now are not measuring their lean muscle mass.
No.
Not only that, we don't have a great way to do it. DEXA is not a great way, right?
No.
And it's not very feasible for people to typically measure their lean muscle mass. So my recommendation.
Best way, if I can just ask really quick, how would you recommend that somebody measures this?
This is challenging, right? Because people always think DEXA is the best way.
Yeah.
DEXA is not. DEXA is an implied number. What DEXA is really good at is bone and fat. And then it does calculations and then determines skeletal muscle, but doesn't directly measure skeletal muscle. You know, so they say hydrostatic weighing. Nobody has access to that.
No.
Right. So bioimpedance, and listen, you could look at tissue quality under ultrasound. Nobody has access to that. And it's so variable.
Can you step on a scale somewhere and do that little?
So you can use, yes. So what you can do is you can use a in-body, something like that, which is bioimpedance. Is it incredibly accurate? It can underestimate body fat percent. But what's so great about it is that it allows for a standard. So you have this machine and then you go to this machine every week or every 2 weeks. And if you can use the same machine, that's the best thing you can do. And then measurements, right? So waist measurements, hip measurements, really staying on top of your numbers because it's so interesting. There's a ton of data out there on body fat percentage, what would be considered obese and what is considered normal. But Kellyanne, I can't tell you what your percent muscle mass should be. And nobody can.
Interesting. So again, it's getting those averages.
And it's totally underrepresented as this organ of longevity because we have spent so much time focusing on the problem. We've spent decades and decades focusing on adiposity.
Isn't that interesting?
It is. It's the wrong thing. It's chasing symptomology.
And there's so many, think about how many course corrections that we have had. It was sugar, we don't want to get too much sugar. So we're going to throw in the pink, yellow, blue packet. Right. Oh, we don't want too much fat. Right. So we're going to throw in all. And so this is a lesson here. Yeah. As we mature and evolve and develop in time, we start improving. And so this is great that you can be a messenger to really get this out. But
if people get this, we can all change the paradigm of health, right? Because obesity and all the concomitant diseases will no longer exist. Yes, I hate saying that in blanket statements. There are major issues that perhaps we cannot change based on genetics. But if you can understand the fundamental concept that muscle is the organ of longevity, and we're going to talk about dietary protein and how you eat to maintain tissue. Yes. Because this is a highly metabolic organ, right? And when you keep it healthy, I told you now that, everyone worries about putting on weight. The way to prevent weight gain is through healthy muscle tissue, right? Because of its, metabolic activity as you exercise and just its amino acid reservoir. It does all these things in the body, right? So when you're young, you can eat the Twinkie diet. I know nobody here is eating a Twinkie diet, but if you are 15 to 20, you have so much flexibility because your insulin is high and it's not making you grow wide, it's making you grow up, right? Yes. Your IGF-1 is high, your testosterone is high. There's all these hormones that are really in an optimal range. And then what happens is there's this shifting point, and we don't exactly know where it is. You know, nowadays, I think that it's probably younger than 40s because of our highly domesticated life. So what happens is the hormones then shift, and now we're dealing with just insulin, right? Your hormones are declining, your testosterone, your growth hormone, these hormones are declining, and now we're run by insulin. And if you're run by insulin, you're going to grow wide and you're not going to grow up.
Right? It's so true. I've seen that. I've seen that myself.
So there you go.
And I want to be sure, I want to be clear about how much protein people should get. 68 grams most.
So that's what the NHANES data says. That's gross. That's going to do nothing for anybody. So the NHANES data, which is the largest data set, will say, hey, females are getting 68 grams of protein and males are getting maybe 90. So I am going to tell you, I'm 125 pounds, I need 125 grams of protein to just be able to be in a more optimal body composition.
So what does that look like? If
so that's almost double what people are getting.
Okay.
Right. So now I'm telling you, if the recommendation is 0.8 grams per kilogram, which is what the RDA is, the science shows us that we need almost double, right? To have more optimal functioning. So what that means is 125 grams of protein is my baseline. Now I divide it into 30 to 50 grams per meal. And the reason I do this is to maximally stimulate this tissue. Because when you eat sub-threshold, so for all my people that are saying I'm eating 2 eggs and I'm getting my protein in, that is sub-threshold. And it's based on the amino acid content. So if you're getting in 2 eggs, you're getting 12 grams of protein. You are not going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. You're not going to trigger that stimulation ever happen. So then you will end up getting, right? Sorry, my baby's crying in the back.
Oh, anytime. that little munchkin
so
can cry on my dime anytime.
So then you get a sub-threshold amount of amino acids, and you never trigger the stimulus of the tissue because it's so expensive to get rid of the nitrogen and urea, right? The nitrogen to urea. It's very taxing on the body. And the concept for the body to be able to create a new protein, because we're always in a balance, takes a ton of metabolic effort. So if you're sub-threshold, the body's like, well, it just doesn't really count. So when you hit between 30 and 50 grams of protein per meal, you get a robust stimulus of this process called mTOR, which arguably declines as you age and you get that anabolic resistance, but you have the capacity to overcome that when you get your protein dosing right.
How does somebody know that they've gotten 30 to 50 grams of protein? Is there a way, a watchful thing that they can do? You know, that we hear about the palm of the hand.
Yeah.
Is there any measurement?
Palm and a half, people. Palm and a half.
Is that a palm? So
a palm is probably around 3 ounces. So you need, so for every 1 gram, so for every 1 ounce of 1 ounce of protein so for every 1 ounce is 7 grams of protein.
Every 1 ounce, it's 7 grams.
7 grams. So you would need 7 grams times 5. Mm-hmm. So 5 ounces would give you 35 grams of protein.
And so it's interesting because knowing what we know now and knowing what we're learning, we really need to focus this. We really need to start reallocating our thought process on how we build a plate.
100%.
Okay, Dr. Lyon, I'm going to be devil's advocate here because if I hear one more person say plant-based, 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 tell me, is there a way that we can get our protein that is not in the form of an animal and still get the, all of the advantages that you're speaking of?
Totally. And I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here. So let's say we're going to get our protein from quinoa. Well, it's going to take us 6 cups of quinoa to equal 1 3-ounce chicken breast. So you can totally get those amino acids, and it's going to be around 1,000 calories versus whatever the caloric intake is, maybe 150 of a chicken breast. So yes, it can be done. So there's my devil's advocate. So an individual requires 25 to 40% more of the substance if it's plant-based protein. So for example, if you have a hemp-based protein and you look at the back and it says 30 grams of protein, you can arguably cut that value in half. And it really, the body recognizes that as about 15 grams of protein because of the amino acid profile. So in essence, you would have to have 45 grams of that hemp protein to equal 30 grams of an animal-based protein. So you need between 25 and 40% more of a plant-based protein. Now, that being said, you can add in branched chain amino acids.
That was my question. So you can add, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, can't wait.
How would one do that? So I'm trying to think, what are the foods that are most complementary to eat with protein, and
Yes.
can you supplement with amino acids and feel like you're getting a protein hit?
Absolutely. I don't recommend supplementing with amino acids alone. So for muscle turnover to happen, you need the whole spectrum of amino acids, which is really interesting because really the research came out in the 80s. You know, amino acid research is pretty new, you know, like considerably. So if you want to be more vegan or vegetarian, then, and let's say you're a vegetarian and you really say, you know, Dr. G, I only want 2 ounces of fish. I would say, okay, with that 2 ounces of fish, you've got a baseline high quality protein. Why don't we add 5 grams of amino acids, of branched chain amino acids, to bring up that quality of protein? You could easily do that and overcome your anabolic threshold. Now, do I recommend this for for aging individuals? I don't, because you have to get your calories from somewhere. And it's very difficult to put, there are overfeeding studies. It is incredibly difficult to put on body fat by eating protein. The body does not.
But should we be afraid of renal disease? You know, being too hard on our kidneys. You know, we hear these things. Should a diabetic be afraid of it?
Yeah. So there were 3 recent meta-analysis, which is a group of a bunch of high quality data that looked at kidney disease and protein. And you know what it found? It found that protein actually increases the glomerular filtration rate of the kidneys. So it actually improved their functioning. And another big myth is bone. So I trained in geriatrics at WashU, and one of the things that we did is, you know, you take care of falls and fractures, and you look at bone density and you track their bone mass. Protein is what makes bone. So those individuals that had a higher, more optimal protein diet had better bone tissue.
So what is all this hoopla then? What is the basis of this fear of protein? Where is this coming from? If this could, because everything you told me, and I know you, so since I know you personally, I know you only speak science. So since everything you said is science-based, where is this? Is this a bad?
It's an anti-animal narrative. So Kelly is right. We know each other, and I have been trained by some of the most world-class scientists. And one of their fundamental beliefs, so Donald Layman, who's one of the grandfathers of protein metabolism, really puts in the head of all his students is integrity matters. So scholarly integrity is really where you hold yourself. If I say something, I'll tell you it's my opinion. But if it's science, which it's reproducible science, I will tell you that. Because that's my job as a lifelong student to be able to share that.
Yeah.
So what's happened is we have a whole anti-animal narrative. Eating protein is incredibly emotional for people because it has a face. It's the only macronutrient that has a face. I mean, arguably the avocado on the floor in my kitchen probably has a face now too, but protein is very emotional for people. So what's happened, and this really goes back to the Ansel Keys time, you know, but what's really happened is that the people that are animal activists, which are some of the original people and the anti-protein people, were what the guidelines were made from, right? So this was a group of individuals. And what happened is they went after everything. So number one, they started the myth that protein causes cancer, which we can talk about. Then they said, well, protein is bad for cholesterol. You know, red meat's bad for cholesterol. And then it went on to say that it's going to kill the planet. Meanwhile, agriculture, you know, probably accounts in the US for 8% of any kind of greenhouse gas, right? So industry and electricity is 80%, but somehow we're still focused on cattle, which if it's just cattle is probably around 3.5% of any kind of contribution. So it's all agenda, right? So we have massive, massive agendas because if I can't get you to stop eating protein, I'm going to tell you it's bad for your health, bad for the environment, and somehow going to, like kill you. So basically, none of the arguments has held up. Every single one of them has been disproven. But what happens is you get the mouse with the microphone. So it's a really interesting environment that we live in now. So you have, big food corporations like Beyond Burger or Beyond Meat, whatever it is, and Quaker. And these are big money industries,
Yes.
right? And they can say whatever they want. They can put in millions of dollars to the American Heart Association to say, eat more grains, eat more oats, right? Eat more like processed oats, whatever it is. They can actually say that. And then you have beef and egg and dairy. You've got the commodities. The commodities are run by a different organization. They can't say anything other than they're part of a healthy diet. So when you have these claims that are bashing, red meat, eggs, that whole egg thing is a myth.
You have to explain that a little bit. I want everyone to know a little bit about that.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's this whole thing about cholesterol and eggs. I don't know how it got so out of hand. I keep waiting.
It's totally made up.
Well, I keep waiting for something like, on the cover of Time magazine, when finally they figured out fats and the right kind of fats, it said, eat your butter. That was the cover. I keep waiting for something like that to happen with
what's interesting is that even if we just take a look back, they've gotten everything wrong. So far policy has gotten carbohydrates wrong. We told everyone to go on a plant-based diet. And this is from Ansel Keys. So Ansel Keys was this physiologist from Minnesota who spent time at Creed and determined that when he went to Italy and then he said, man, people are so much healthier here. And this is at the time where it was around World War II and people were dying and they were having a ton of heart attacks because everybody smoked. But somehow he decided it was saturated fat. And then somehow he looked at these people, cherry picked some data, and this was during Lent, right? So no one was eating meat. And he said, well, these guys are healthy. Everybody else should be doing this.
Yes.
Right. So then he comes back to America, gets into cahoots with this guy named Dr. White. They go up to the Senate or whatever, and they're talking, and he's part of the American Heart Association. And then they're like, well, we should create this policy. Right. So then with the help of Harvard, we end up creating a very plant-based, low saturated fat diet, which made everybody fat. Right. Then this book comes, Diet for the New Planet comes out.
Yes.
Francis Borlape, in the Smithsonian. I mean, this was like so pivotal where everybody should be eating like cows. You guys should all be like grazing and eating grains or whatever. And this narrative made everybody obese, right? We tried this food guide pyramid based on this information. And by the way, it wasn't based on any science.
And we find that sometimes, and that's why it's so good to have someone like you that's like laying out all the science and saying, oh, wait a minute, I see problems, I see gaping holes. And the thing about eggs, which is crazy to me, that there's choline in eggs, which is one of the consummate fat transporters.
Totally.
It actually transports the cholesterol. So it's great. And when you really break down the food and when you really look at a lot of things, you find that there are a lot of myths. People are writing in, we're getting so many questions. They want to know, is saturated fat good? This is more of a protein discussion. And I want to keep it to protein. But one of the things that I want to talk about is one thing I had asked you before, and I want to circle back to that. Are there foods that are best served with protein, and should you eat protein first? I know that there's some.
Yes. So satiation. So the difference between plant-based protein and animal-based proteins on a core fundamental level, which you cannot argue, right? So this is interesting. This is one of the great things about science is there's something called a diaz, and it's a scoring system of amino acids. And it really tells what is the quality of the protein. And you can't change the amino acid profile of a food, right? So these hard, fast biological numbers, animal protein makes up the same amino acid profile that really serves animal tissue, right? In the same percentages. And plants have a much lower amino acid content, in particularly the branch chains, which, by the way, I told you is the key to the muscle and the organ of longevity. So you can't get away from having an optimal amount of branch chains. You will destroy yourself, right? The trajectory. And I have been at the bedside of hundreds and hundreds of dying people. unfortunately, because that was part of my training. And you will see that you cannot replace the two, right? They are not interchangeable. So plant-based proteins do require an augmentation, and that augmentation is not feasible for the amount of caloric load. So rice and beans, the amount of rice and beans that you would have to eat to meet that amino acid threshold. So it's not about, I want to clear up something. This is so important. It is not about just getting the amino acids. So there are all the amino acids in broccoli. It's really important that you guys understand this. This is about getting the correct dosing. Food is medicine. Food is a stimulus for the body, right? And you have to dose it just like you would dose medicine. If you don't hit that 30-gram minimum, you do not trigger the rest of these subsequent processes that stimulate muscle tissue. You will become skinny fat. You will not protect this tissue as you age.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's so, are there better proteins for building muscles than others?
Yeah.
Like collagen versus,
Yes,
anything.
let's talk about it. So high quality animal protein include, and if anybody here follows me, you know what I'm going to say, but I will say it until everybody has heard it and they all get it. So beef, bison, chicken, turkey, if it flies or runs, eggs also count. Whey protein is great. So these are high quality amino acid balanced proteins. They're animal-based whole proteins. How you would use collagen, which I actually use collagen in my own life often. I use 2 scoops twice a day. I add those in with branched chain amino acids to now have a complete protein.
And so is there, so really what you're saying is with plant-based, there really is no way that we could possibly eat enough of the foods that go with the plant-based protein to get the branched chain aminos. So we really need to stick to this beef, bison,
Well, you
chicken, turkey.
You could if you have the metabolic capacity to do it. So if you are training and you are doing a ton of resistance exercise and you're doing a ton of activity, then you could offset that caloric load that comes with the carbohydrates in that plant-based proteins. The other option is you could do powders. So you could do a rice pea blend. But again, these are new foods and we don't know how long they've been around. We don't know what these isolates do. We just don't know.
No, not fully. And what about, the question I get a lot is about fasting, and does fasting create muscle wasting?
So that's an interesting question. Now I'm going to say it depends, and that's super annoying. So I'm sorry. Fasting in and of itself is a catabolic process, right? Mm-hmm. However, you can protect your tissue if you are exercising while fasting. Now, of course, this depends on the length of the fast. This depends on if you are in ketosis, right? Because a ketogenic style diet, ketones can be muscle sparing. But depending on if you are going to choose to fast, you need to be training.
So what is
And by the way, if you're aging, I don't recommend fasting. Once you lose that tissue, it is devastatingly difficult to get back.
What is the right amount of time to fast? And now that we're in this situation, is this a good time to fast? Is there a better time than others to fast?
Right now is, so let me see. So right now, you have to think about what season we're in, right? What is the season we're in? Are we in the season of stressing our bodies? And I can tell you for the patients that I have, and I love them so much, they're stressed. The idea of actually having them fast more and increase their cortisol, right? Because the body has to go through a process of gluconeogenesis. And I don't think that this would be the ideal time to fast. However, that being said, if you really need to control your calories because you have disordered patterns of eating and you can't seem to get yourself in check, eat your protein first, because protein has this capacity very well documented in the literature for satiation. So you're going to be less hungry. And this is incredibly well documented as it relates to just overfeeding studies and eating protein first. And this is really out of Heather Leidy's lab. If anyone was interested, they gave individuals proteins, imaged their brain, and they saw what effect it had. People were much less likely to overeat or binge on carbohydrates. So protein first, and I know that you asked about the whole fasting thing.
Yeah.
Perhaps this might not be the number one time to do it, because really the priority here needs to be protecting your tissue. And if you're not able to train and you're not able to maintain that tissue, you don't want to further be in a catabolic state, and that, as I say that, I think, should people be in a calorie deficit? If you are, you need to be in a calorie deficit with a really optimal protein intake to protect that tissue.
Yeah. And someone was asking, Dr. Lyon, when should someone stop fasting? You were saying when you start losing muscle mass. Is there an age where you have to start thinking about it?
Yeah. This is very tricky because in your 60s, the tissue really changes. So I would say definitely in your 60s, you should not be fasting. I am not into the fast for the aging. This is purely anecdotal. This is not based on evidence. But I really think that individuals should reconsider that. And also if they're going through acute stressors, and, fasting can be thought of as a stress to the body, right? It can increase reverse T3. The body will adjust its metabolism, and it's just throwing one more thing into the fire. There's just much better ways to optimize your plate. When you increase your protein, interestingly, high quality protein with like beef or chicken have the more optimal branched chain amino acids, and in particular leucine, which we talked about. Leucine is very interesting. It actually stimulates something called CPT1, which helps fatty acid metabolism. So you actually begin to burn fat.
Wow.
So protein isn't just about muscle tissue. It has a lot of those amino acids have so many other metabolic benefits.
Wow.
I mean,
so
that's pretty outrageous.
That is outrageous. And people are asking about branched chain amino acids. And do you recommend them? If so, what type do you recommend? Is there a brand that you recommend? And what do you take them with?
So you should not. So this is interesting. So branched chain amino acids, I don't recommend them on their own. You should take branched chain amino acids with other amino acids. So with other protein sources, because you need the full spectrum of amino acids to generate, everything works in balance. Just like in life, everything has a balance. So you don't want to just sprinkle a little amino acids in there and not have anything else. So it's kind of like turning the car on without having any gas in it. So you're going to turn the car on, you're going to stimulate these processes like mTOR without having any of the juice, right? So the answer to the question is, when should you have amino acids and with what? I would say that they can be helpful for muscle recovery with other proteins, right? So they have been shown to actually help reduce soreness. With a lower quality protein meal, branched chains would be perfect to add in. So there are ways that you can definitely utilize branched chains.
And so is there any supplements that you take that you love that keep your body really going?
I mean, I take a lot. You're asking great questions. So there's a couple that maybe perhaps in this space people don't talk about. So creatine is great. So 5 grams of creatine, actually there's been some data to suggest that creatine actually helps the brain.
It helps the brain. Now, so let me ask you, I remember my bodybuilding days. I was saying earlier, I forget who I was telling, I was Miss St. Louis, always doing the Arnold Classic, all that.
You were from St. Louis?
I went to school in St. Louis.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I lived in Chesterfield for a while. We'll talk about that.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
Yeah, so I used to love going to the Arnold Classic and all that. I was really
Incredible.
into bodybuilding. And so creatinine was something that was taken by all the bodybuilders. Yeah. And so one of the things that I found that with some people, it made them break out. With some people, it made them kind of aggressive. Has it changed throughout the years? And is that a dosing issue? And
it was probably that was probably a confounding variable. There were probably other things that were happening that they were doing. And of course, if you're underfed, then your cognitive control and your cognitive thought process is really, you're angry, you're a hunter. So it's possible that there were just these other aspects. But, creatine can be great. It can be great for brain health. It can be great just for muscle energy, especially if you don't eat a ton of red meat. And then, obviously vitamin D is fantastic. And, my husband he always uses whey protein or rice pea blend. He was in the military for a long time and he's very active, to say the least.
Yes, to say the least. He's a big guy. He's got a really good muscle mass.
Yeah.
How about kids? Is there anything you can do for kids? I mean, is there any time that you should start thinking about them and what you should do for them to protect their muscle?
So this is an interesting question because there's some controversy around children lifting weights because of their growth plates.
Yes.
I would say, I was very active, and I would say that most of the time when individuals are active, that the body can compensate. So, I'm not talking about lifting a ton of heavy weights, but just maintaining activity and, good habits of daily living. I mean, I know my daughter is going to be into sports.
There's zero probability she will not. Right. With you and your husband, right. All your friends that are all Navy SEALs, zero probability.
Right. Yeah. So will she lift weights? She will. Hopefully she'll do, she's not the chess type already. She's already trying to walk around, which is so funny in quarantine. So being active from a young age and really stimulating that tissue, the people that do the best, muscle does have memory. You do have, motor neurons and satellite cells. Muscle has the capacity to really kind of remember, for lack of a better term, right? So it's much easier if you've been trained than start training later on in life, which you should no matter what. But for all you people that are midlife right now, do not let one more day go by, right? Don't let it go by. And also you start habits young, probably 9 months is too young to lift weights. She does have little baby barbells, but starting.
I knew it.
But starting young, and it doesn't have to be heavy weights. It can be swimming. It can be other things. And as far as protein recommendation in the growth phase, protein recommendation is actually much higher in young kids than it is in adults. But of course, it's based on body size and the growth period. It could be anywhere from 2.2 grams per kilogram. But again, these recommendations, you have to understand our working model is broken. So we have a broken working model.
Yeah, we do. And is there anything when you're at the store, anyone's going to go out and buy protein, what are some of the things that they need to look for that should or should not be on the label?
So I will tell you what is something great to look for. You have to look at the amino acid. That's like the number one thing I look at. And you always want to look at the leucine content. So that leucine content should be at least 1.8 grams.
1.8.
Mm-hmm. And it should have a full spectrum of amino acids, but it definitely should have leucine, isoleucine, and valine in a 2 to 1 ratio.
Let's talk about all the things that muscle is actually good for, because I don't know if people realize that skin, hair, nails, everything, teeth, everything. We're walking protein. That's what we are.
Everything in our bodies is made from protein. And in fact, amino acids are never wasted. So it's not like the body, stores it, or, the body utilizes every protein for a task, everything. It's that important. It's the most misunderstood and undervalued macronutrient. And I'll prove it to you. If you look at the label of anything that's in front of you with any protein bar, you'll see carbohydrates, and carbohydrates will have its breakdown, and you'll see fat, and fat will have its breakdown, and then you get to protein, and it's got one line.
Yes.
But these amino acids, there's 20 amino acids, and 9 are essential, meaning you can't get them from anywhere else, right? And it's those 9 essential amino acids that really determine the quality of the nutrition. And the amino acids are so many, right? 20 is a lot, in my opinion, and they all do different things. For example, when you eat protein, at a very fundamental level, you're dealing with protein turnover. So the skin, the body, the gut has to maintain a homeostasis, right? You can't just be catabolic and just fall off your skin just can't fall off. That would be totally weird. So there's this constant, turnover and replacement that happens. Now, when you are just at the baseline level, the RDA, you're just surviving. So the body will trade off long-term survival for short-term protection, right? So what does that mean? So for example, if you eat more than the baseline of protein, for example, arginine is one of the amino acids, is a precursor for nitric oxide. That's a vasodilator. So it actually lowers blood pressure. So dietary protein can actually lower blood pressure. And that's just one example. Glutamine is necessary for the gut. It's one of the big fuel sources for the enterocytes in the gut. And what about the branched chain amino acids? Feed your immune cells. This is their primary source of energy. So you can see, that protein in the diet is so much more than just muscle. But muscle is the foundation. It's your structure, right? It's your metabolic currency. If you don't get that foundation right, then you don't get the subsequent other things right?
Well, it's interesting because we're always thinking about muscles as making us look beautiful and sexy. There's nothing that makes you look sexy than that svelte body. But what we're finding is that this is the derivative of just about everything.
Yes.
Really, and I'm becoming really clear on that. And when I think back to myself historically, I've always looked the best. When I pump the weights, I've pumped them hard. People ask me, and I eat protein, and people ask me, what about longevity? I don't think there's a better longevity hack.
There's not.
Walking around the block is wonderful and beautiful, and take that air in, but you've gotta lift the weights.
You do. And you have to eat your protein. And people don't understand that this is the solution to all these metabolic illnesses, including the metabolic component of Alzheimer's, which is type 3 diabetes of the brain. It's metabolic derangement. I used to image people's brains. I worked in an obesity clinic and doing geriatric clinic and obesity research for 2 years. The wider the waistline, the lower the brain volume. It is a non-negotiable to be able to get your metabolism in check. This body composition, the fact that I can't tell you, Kellyanne, what your muscle mass should be, is outrageous to me. The fact that I can tell you what % body fat you shouldn't be continues to perpetuate this narrative of just looking at the problem. And then you have this other group over here with this anti-animal narrative that further is destroying everybody's health. This is a problem. But we can fix it by shifting the paradigm and understanding that we are not over fat. We are under muscled.
Say that again.
We are not over fat. We're not over fat. We are under muscled. Fat is symptomology. Muscle is the key. It is the key to longevity. It is the way in which we can protect ourselves. Diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, these are diseases of the muscle tissue. These are not diseases of obesity.
So we talked a lot about proteins and foods and fasting and how to do that. And one of the things I didn't get in fasting is that, and I want to just kind of cover everything so everyone has their little tips for every area. Fasting, is there a length of time you recommend for fasting?
So I actually really there's a couple strategies I like. So I do like time restricted feeding, which is not the traditional fast, right? So it's an 8 to 9 hour feeding window. Here's why I like it. I like it because it allows for bowel rest, calorie control. And when I say bowel rest, you're not constantly feeding. It allows for that circadian entrainment, right? There's the clock genes and the circadian rhythm in the body, which is very true and well documented. We know it's not just entrained by light, but it's also triggered by food, right? It's probably the most intimate way it is triggered is by food. Yeah. So really that 8 to 9 hour window is great. Again, it depends on what season you're in. There are things like a methionine restriction at certain points in your life. And I don't want to go too down that rabbit hole, but that is a one amino acid restriction. It's called methionine, which is very low in plants. And so you would go mostly plants or all plants for like 5 days, and it creates quite a bit of stress for the body. And it's very low calorie. So it's like a pseudo fast for 5 days. And that's based on methionine restriction.
So
not the right time to do it. Nobody should be doing that.
Nobody should be doing that. No, not right now. What about, let's talk about a little bit about exercise And what's the best way to build? Actually, we have about 6 minutes left. So let's talk about the best way to build the body's muscle. Do the bands work as well as the weights?
Volume is the key. Interesting, right? Volume is the key.
Explain.
So the volume, so when you think about training, you think about the rep range and you think about the weights. But what's really important, and this is interesting, and really I specialize in the aging population and obesity. And what they found was that you don't necessarily have to go really heavy, right? You don't have to be doing, which I love lifting heavy because I like being strong and it's just fun, right? So you don't have to do heavy squat, bench, or deadlift to build muscle. But what you can do, I mean, if you want to, you can. But what you also can do, and this is based on research from Stu Phillips' lab at McMaster University, what you can do is that you can actually just go to exhaustion, fatigue, exertion. So you could lift lighter weights and go 20 reps and be exhausted and go to fatigue. And, you know, I cringe to say this, but I would be not telling the truth, but it can actually have the same effect as lifting heavy.
That's interesting because I thought one was more for bulk and one was more for length.
So it is interesting. And again, I personally would say, man, I think everyone should be lifting heavy, but that's not necessarily what the data supports. What
about someone who says, I don't enjoy lifting weights?
I say, I don't care. Yeah, well,
you have to do it, right?
I don't like brushing my teeth, but guess what?
It's a prescription, right? It's a prescription.
We're domesticated. There's only 2 ways to stimulate muscle tissue, and that's through exercise and dietary protein. Really, those are the 2 primary ways. If you don't do that, you know how we've all seen marbled steak? Once that fat infiltrates around and in that tissue, it changes the mitochondria density, which is the energy source. So if you're feeling fatigued, a lot of older people begin to feel fatigue. They have a change in muscle fiber type. So it goes from type 2 fibers to type 1 type fibers, like the skinny fibers as opposed to the bulky fibers. You do not want that to happen. You have to train, right? And once that fat gets into the tissue and that tissue becomes sarcopenic or obesogenic sarcopenic, then the ability for that muscle to contract, the ability for that muscle to be an endocrine organ is largely diminished. And this is as you age, when you get diabetes, Alzheimer's, hypertension, right? You have these metabolic derangements that begin to happen. So whether you like to resistance train or not, some people don't like to floss their teeth or brush them. You have to do it. You were designed to move. We are designed,
no question,
to move. But and listen, some of my patients are like, well, I just want to do Pilates and yoga. And I say, well, that's great, but we're not counting that as your exercise.
What I say too, same thing. You can't, you've got to put your time in. So how many days a week would you say someone needs to do resistance?
It depends on if they're trained or untrained. So I think a great starting point is 3 to 4 days a week. I mean, you really have to get a good system. It can't be haphazard, and it's really hard right now, but this is the time to get good online training. So I do kettlebells and I train 3 to 4 days a week with my trainer, and we do it on Zoom. So Melissa Paris and she'd be like, all right, let's go. I got some kettlebells over here in the back. We're doing squat. It's so heavy. I pick it up, has a big skull on it. I pick it up at the end. And she's like, come on, squat it out. This is
we have no excuse now. There's no excuse.
Are you kidding? I'm like, the baby's here. She's screaming. The other kettlebell's here, and here I am.
That's what I wanted to point out to everyone. This woman, this medical doctor, very well-trained medical doctor, just had a baby, and she's running a practice, okay? And she lives in New York, running a practice. And this is clearly a woman who does not stand for excuses. Clearly. So
I don't. And that's why I was so embarrassed that I had the wrong bio, because I didn't get, which... Man, I'm like,
all have that. You're
but listen, this is why I'm you bring up a point. So my husband's a Navy SEAL, and I take care of elite military operators. And the gift that has been to be able to care for the most elite warriors of our time is not me being, is I've learned so much, right? Because you begin to see what this group of individuals stands for and what they won't, and how they operate in their own life. And it becomes very eye-opening because they have these golden threads that just run through, right? And that's what's so interesting, and I don't want to get off topic, but yeah,
It's fascinating.
I definitely juggle a lot. And you become so inspired by the people around you. I mean, these military operators, I had one guy, he'd lost a leg. And I'm like, oh my God, how are you doing? And he looked at me, he was like, Doc, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, here you are, you lost a leg, and it was on friendly soil, and it was a 17-year-old girl texting and driving. And he looks at me and he's like, Doc, that was 6 months ago. Legitimately, the guy lost his leg from a girl, 17-year-old, on a motorcycle. I mean, and this is the quality, the individual. So you begin to see what the top will stand for and what they won't, right? And then you execute. And then you're like, man, this guy just lost his leg. And most of us haven't got over something that happened 2 years ago.
It's a mindset. So I want to end by, I want you to address everyone out there. This was amazing, such good information. And clearly you can see the energy she has. She's built well. She's beautiful. She just had a baby. She works all the time. So clearly this is
any babysitters out there?
I was going to say, here's your time.
Please. Seriously. Kellyanne, get your butt over here. She's so cute.
Hey, if only. So soon enough. What would you say to everyone in closing? There's a lot of people feeling a lot of different things out there in a lot of different households, and it's so motivational and so encouraging. What would you want everyone to know?
You've got this. You have got this. This is opportunity only, truly, in every sense of the word.
And you just can't. There's nothing else that you have to put in here. It's what you put.
You got this. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
We got this. Let's go. This is so great. This is really what I would say. And I would say eat your protein.
And eat your protein. So I think I'm going to
go. Win here first. Win here first. And it's effort. Win here first. Listen, the narrative, don't be impressed with it, because I will tell you this, out of all the patients that I've seen, they all have their own narrative, and it's uninteresting, and we all have it. The sooner you get the fact that you don't have to believe it, that it's just doing what the brain does, which the brain produces thought, the heart beats, and the muscles produce myokine. Hey, it's doing its job. Doesn't mean you have to produce his thoughts. Doesn't mean you have to believe them.
That is so well put, and I can't think of a better way to end. This has been absolutely unbelievable. As you know, on Doctors Night Out, these are doctors that I know, love, and trust. These are doctors that are committed to their growth. Every doctor I have on spends so much time in the effort of growth to serve you. They're your true seekers. Tomorrow night, next week, next Wednesday, we have another star-studded panel. On Thursday, we have a deep dive that you're going to absolutely love. You can find us every day at noon on Instagram Live. Dr. Lyon, thank you so much for your contribution, your continued contribution. You're such a pleasure. You have so much energy, and you just give that energy so beautifully. We so appreciate it. So we will see everyone again next time. Join us tomorrow at noon for some great tips from Nancy Patera. If you're feeling a little that quarantine yuck, she is going to pick you right up with some beauty tips. We'll see you then. Bye-bye, everyone. Good night.